Want to welcome everybody to the public training today. We're excited to have Josh Legler with us. He's going to do a training on StateDataSet, dashboards, tools, best practices. This is open to anybody who's interested, but the target audience really is data managers, as this will be very specific to roles and tasks that data managers are involved in. You're welcome to use the chat. You're also welcome to unmute and ask questions as we go along. We try to build time into these trainings so that you can ask questions and dig a little deeper on any issues that you might be having with StateDataSet. So I think we're good to go, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Josh Legler. We appreciate you being with us today, Josh.
Sure. Thanks, Julianne. Welcome, everyone, and great to be with you today. As Julianne mentioned, we're going to be talking about StateDataSet today from a data manager's perspective. So it looks like probably, I'm guessing about half of you are state data managers, and then it looks like we have people from EMS software vendor companies as well, and certainly there will probably be good information in here for you also. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. Oh, sorry, before my agenda, I want your agenda. I want to just start out at the very beginning with any questions that any of you have brought about maintaining your state data set. So go ahead and open it up right now. Go ahead and unmute yourself, or I think if you use the chat, I'll make sure I can get to so I can view the chat. Any questions that any of you have kind of brought with you that you want to make sure we cover today about StateDataSet?
Yeah, Josh, this is Clay. Maybe I'll break the ice. I apologize. I'm not a state data manager, but I've answered 2 queries past week about this question. They were interested, 2 veteran data managers who've worked with the state data set and have been good about maintaining their state data set, wanted to know exactly what would happen under 3.5. What would be different for them with the move to 3.5?
Okay, great. Good. We will cover that. I've got that in my slides. That's a great topic. Anyone else that's come with questions today about StateDataSet? Let's see. Hannah said in the chat, I've tried to update our StateDataSet, but unclear on how that information trickles down to third-party software that import the data into our system. Great. Let's see. How am I going to summarize that? I am definitely going to cover that today as well. Let's say, how StateDataSet affects local agency data and how it gets there. That's a great topic. Okay, any others? Okay, cool. Well, I feel great that both of those are topics that I've put on my agenda to cover today. So that's excellent. And we're going to have another opportunity for you to ask questions. You know, feel free to interrupt me throughout the training with questions, but there'll be another point that I'll stop later on and ask for more questions from you. Okay, let's go ahead and look at what I've got planned for the agenda today. Number 1, the purpose of StateDataSet. What it's for. Then we're going to talk about what's in your state data set, the contents of it, how your state data set affects data quality of the data that you are receiving from EMS agencies, some state data set maintenance tips, and then finally some dashboards that the NEMSIS TAC provides that are built using data that you and other states have provided in your state data sets, which gives you some abilities to do some research of other states as you're considering changes in your state. Okay, so starting kind of at the big picture and then zooming in, Each of you have a state repository that is hosted by NEMSIS. It's a Git repository, and software vendors can clone that repository. They can follow it, watch it, automatically check out data from it, see the change log, the line-by-line changes that have been made to resources in that repository, and so on. So there's all kinds of stuff that gets driven off of the fact that your state has a repository hosted by NEMSIS. Your repository has 4 folders in it, one for any data dictionary files that you may provide, one for resources, and the key resource in that folder is your state data set. You may also provide other stuff if you want to, but the state data set is the standardized resource file that contains lists of things that are specific to your state, that are important for local EMS agencies and their vendors to know about in order to properly set up and configure their software. Then there's also a schematron folder, which contains your validation rules, and a web services folder, which can contain information about how to connect to the web service that your state system provides. So we're going to focus in on state data set, which is in the resources folder. So for a long time, we've had DEM dataset and EMS dataset as these 2 core datasets that are standardized in the NEMSIS standard. And in both of those cases, the data is flowing from a local EMS agency software system to your state software system. And then you're sending it on up to the national database. And state dataset has a different life cycle because it's information that you as a state are generating and you are pushing it the other direction. It's for the agency to use and consume. So you're the producer and they're the consumer of this particular data set. So one thing that I think people have gotten confused about, and I want to make sure I really clarify, state data set and schematron are not the same thing as each other. They both start with the letter S, but that's all. So your state data set is a list of things. For example, our state collects these data elements and you provide a list of those data elements. Or our state has the following facilities and you provide a list of hospitals, nursing homes, etc. It's just those lists of things. Your schematron file or schematron schema is your validation rules. So with schematron, that's where you're actually putting in requirements or validation rules about the data coming into your state system from local systems. So that's where you might say, the state data set might list all the data elements you collect, but the schematron schema might have a rule that says that a particular data element is required when a certain situation is met. The state data set might have a list of all the facilities in your state, but the schematron file might have a rule that says that the facility ID of a facility in the agency's demographic data has to be an ID that actually exists in your state data set facility list. So lists are in state data set. The actual rules that if you want to enforce something, then it goes in schematron as a validation rule. I want to pause there. Any questions on either the distinction or the interaction between state data set and schematron? Okay, cool. From time to time, I hear people use these terms interchangeably, and they'll use the term schematron when they were actually talking about their state data set, or vice versa. So important distinction to keep in mind. Okay, so we're going to get to Hannah's question a little bit here. Here's a little mock-up of a local agency NEMSIS compliant system that I mocked up. This system doesn't actually exist in the real world. It's just in PowerPoint here. But I want to use it to this mock-up to illustrate the value that state data set provides to your local EMS agencies as they're trying to comply with the requirements of your state. So let's pretend for a minute that this system is operating in a world without a state data set. And let's say that this is the agency setup area of this software product. And an agency data manager has kind of been working their way through. They've indicated what state they operate in and put in their agency number and name and, you know, fill out what custom data elements they want to collect and so on. And they've gotten down to the medication list. And so the software product here, well, it supports everything in RxNorm. So the software product goes ahead and shows, you know, 100,000 or so RxNorm codes with their labels, and asks the agency data manager to pick out the ones that their agency carries on their ambulances. So they're going to scroll through this list and they're going to find oxygen, for example, and they're going to check the boxes to say which levels in their agency can carry oxygen. And they're going to look for naloxone, but maybe they'll find Narcan instead, and they'll go ahead and use that one or whatever. It's just a huge list that they would have to search and filter through in order to set up the list of medications that they carry. But the reality is that the agencies within your state carry a set of medications that has usually been dictated either entirely or mostly by the state through your administrative rules. And so the state says, if you're an EMT level agency, these are the meds that you carry. If you're a paramedic level agency, these are the meds that you're allowed to carry. And the agency may have some differences compared to what the state permits. The state may permit a kind of a handful of different pain management meds, and the agency may use 2 or 3 out of that bucket that they could choose from. The agency may occasionally carry a medication that is not on the state list that they've gotten approval for. But generally speaking, their selection of medications is really quite close to everyone else's medications within that state. And so now let's switch to a world where there's a state data set. And same thing, I'm in this hypothetical EPCR system here. I'm setting up my medications for the first time, never used the system before. And now when I get to the medications page, instead of just giving me a long list of 100,000 codes, it says, hey, we've read your state data set that your state provided. We already know that your state allows these medications at these levels. Your state allows aspirin to be used at every level. It allows atropine to be used by paramedics. And we've already checked the boxes for you. You take it from here. If your agency doesn't carry one of these meds, go ahead and uncheck it. If there's some other med that your agency does carry, well, then you get to search the whole, list of 100,000 codes and go ahead and add that med to your list. But the agency is getting a nice place to start out as a starting place as they build the configuration of their software. Okay, so to recap, here's what all is in your state data set. Take a look through that list. These are the things that you can, these are the lists that you can build within your state data set. So custom data elements, which elements do you collect, your license levels, procedures, meds, protocols, agencies, and facilities. So let's take a quick run through those different resource lists and see how they might look within this hypothetical agency software product that I'm using. So custom data elements. If you're providing those in a state data set and the agency software is consuming that state data set, then you might get a page like this that says, hey, your state has asked for all these custom elements. So those should be turned on in your data entry form. They should be collected. Now, if for some reason your agency is not going to collect one of those, you turn it off, but you've got an initial setup there, kind of that foundation. They don't need to try to build that custom element in their local software because their vendor has already done it for them. And they've done it based on the state data set custom elements that you provided. So then you can be sure that they actually did it the way that you specified it rather than doing it from scratch. Okay, data elements. Which data elements should be turned on in your data entry form? And then the data manager could go through and make adjustments if they need to, or maybe turn on some additional elements to collect, but kind of have that baseline again. License levels. So it may say, hey, your state doesn't recognize the old, basic, intermediate, EMT, paramedic levels. They recognize all the others. Which levels do you use in your agency? And then the agency may turn off some of these because they don't use them there, but they've got a starting point. Procedures, just like medications. Whoops, that's medications, sorry. Procedures and medications, very similar to each other. You've got a list to select from. Protocols, again, these are the protocols the state recognizes or permits. Take it from there. Other EMS agencies. There's a place when you're filling out your patient care report to indicate the other agencies that were on the scene. And so now the software can provide a list of what those other agencies are along with their codes. And the agency can say, okay, yeah, I'll look through the list of a couple hundred agencies and I'll just check the ones that our agency works with that may show up as other agencies on scene. And finally, facilities. Here's all the facilities that the state recognizes. Go ahead and go through the list. If any of these facilities are used by your agency as either a pickup location or a scene location, or as a destination, you go ahead and select those. So the agency now is selecting from a menu as opposed to having to type everything in from scratch. And that's the value of StateDataSet. Now what happens then is that you see an improvement in data quality in the data coming into your system. Because if an agency sets up their facilities from scratch, they're going to type in facility codes, names, addresses, etc. There's no guarantee really that they're going to type that in exactly how the state specified it. And so as you get data from lots of agencies, you'll get lots of spelling variations, lots of address differences, and even differences in the codes they used for the same exact facility. Whereas with StateDataSet, you're now providing the information out to the agencies in a standardized format. And it's also in a computer readable format, and it's in XML. And that means that their vendor can actually just programmatically consume that data in your StateDataSet. And once you get to that point, you avoid things like typographical errors as people are typing information in. You get every agency using the same code, the same name, the same address for these facilities, and so on. So what I've just described is an ideal compared to where we are at this moment in time. So StateDataSet was introduced in NEMSIS 3.4, which came out, I think, 2015? So it's been around quite a few years now. And over the years, vendors have been building their abilities to automatically consume and process your StateDataSet. And over the years, we've seen gradual improvements among the vendors in their ability to utilize, leverage, really make value of the StateDataSet. And we're going to see continued improvement in the future. And some of that continued improvement will be driven by the change to NEMSIS 3.5, where some new requirements come into place for vendors. But let me pause there. Any questions about what's in your StateDataSet and how that ends up driving data quality for the data coming into your system? Okay. All right, so now let's get to the question that Clay posed, which was what changes in NEMSIS 3.5? And I got to see if I can get my slide to advance here. Well, that's weird. Oh, come on. Okay, let me restart my slideshow, I guess. Oh, that is really odd. Okay, hold on a minute. I guess I am going to close PowerPoint and try again. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. All right, what changes in 3.5 and how does that affect you as a state data manager? In NEMSIS 3.4, oh, let's see, and also a question, let me get this question from Drew, make sure I don't miss it. I've come across states during 3.4 which had the bare minimums in the state data set. And then they had a facilities list in Excel format containing only a facility name and a facility code. Are the states required to populate the state data set to completion in 3.5? Okay, great question. I'm going to hold the answer to that question for about 30 seconds because I think I'm about to cover it right here. Thanks, Drew. Okay, so in NEMSIS 3.4, that's when state data set was first added to NEMSIS. And there was the chicken and egg problem, you know, how can everyone generate a state data set and how can everyone consume it? So to kind of spur the activity there, NEMSIS developed a StateDataSet Builder. That's a product that lives on the NEMSIS website. And probably all of you, if not, yeah, most if not all of you have used that StateDataSet Builder to maintain your own state data set. Along with that, some of the state level vendors played around with some abilities to generate state data sets from state systems. For example, ImageTrend played around with that ability, and they have some limited ability in 3.4 to generate a state data set file, or at least a piece of that state data set file, like your custom element list, for example, or your facility list. So it was not fully developed by state vendors, but there was some efforts there to do it. What's going to change in NEMSIS 3.5 is that in certification testing, your state vendor will be required to demonstrate their ability to generate your full state data set for you from your state system. Now, what's going to be nice here, you know, a couple things. One is, if we take, for example, your facility list, well, you know, you already have to load up a bunch of facilities into your state system. You've got to have them in there anyway. But you need to put them in your state data set so that people using other products are able to get that list as well. And so the way that works today in NEMSIS 3.4 is you need to get your facility list from, you know, the hospital licensing office or wherever the authoritative source of the data is. And then you need to put it into your state system and also put it into your state data set that you publish through NEMSIS. And as you're doing so, that means, one, you've got to put it into two different places. So there's the duplication of effort there. And number two, there could be potentially a mistake or a typo as you transfer the data into your state system or into your state data set. And you could potentially have an issue where the information in your state system does not match your state data set. So you're asking everyone in your state to match up with your state data set, and yet there's the possibility that your own state system may have some differences compared to your state data set. This would also be really important with custom data elements or the medication and procedure lists. So in 3.5, it'll all be generated from your state system, and you will not use the NEMSIS State Dataset Builder at all in NEMSIS 3.5. You'll just use your state system. The second advantage to that change of approach is that today, when you use the State Dataset Builder, it will generate a download of your state data set, and then you email that over to the NEMSIS TAC, and it kind of goes through a manual process there to get published. With NEMSIS 3.5, your vendor will be tested on their ability to submit your state data set through the standard web services submission. So you'll be able to stay within your state product the entire time, building the resources that you need in your product. And really, it's just the click of a button to say, okay, now I want to generate a state data set from my product, and I want to send that state data set over to NEMSIS. It'll just send it through a web services submission. So, and Hannah asked, why wouldn't the state system also use the state data set? In today's world, yeah, that's a great question. You know, you could build your state data set and then have your state vendor import that data into your state system. But the historical reality is that your state system already existed before StateDataSet itself existed. StateDataSet was introduced in NEMSIS 3.4 about 5-6 years ago. So your state system already existed, or at least most of them did. They already had all these lists within them. And so now there's that maintenance effort that it takes to kind of keep both maintained. Now with NEMSIS 3.5, then it really kind of clarifies the model. Your state data system becomes the authoritative source of your state data set. And so that becomes the place where you put the data in and it just generates from there. So great question, Hannah. Let's see. Okay, yeah, to get to Drew's question then, he's seen bare minimum state data sets from some states. And I've seen that as well, where, for example, the state just lists the data elements they collect, or they only put in their facilities list, or maybe they list their state data elements, but then the facilities list is being provided in an Excel file instead of being provided in the state data set. I strongly encourage you to utilize the state data set because it's structured and it's validated, and vendors can count on it being in a particular format from every state. They don't have to kind of reinvent their process every time they see a new spreadsheet from a different state. But with NEMSIS 3.5, technically, at the technical level, all of those sections of state data set are still optional. So your state could still provide just a bare bones, you know, we collect these elements, or this is our agency list. However, because it's being generated from your state system, and because that information already has to be in your state system for your state system to work, it means that we are greatly increasing the likelihood that you're just going to be able to pump out a very full and complete state data set, because you've already got all that information in your state system, and now it's just the click of a button that gets it pushed out into the state data set. So Drew, I think we're going to see some big improvements in the comprehensiveness and completeness of state data sets in NEMSIS 3.5. Okay. All right, so state data managers, you've used the State Builder. You'll probably continue to use it for a while until you get switched over to NEMSIS 3.5 in your state. Let's see, oh, question from Drew before I move on. Is this state data set from the state system intended to be automatically exported to a repository when changes are made? Yeah, there will be a process in place, so it'll be automatically submitted through web services. That means it'll automatically be validated by the NEMSIS TAC. Today, the NEMSIS TAC has to manually validate the state data set. So that'll be automatic. And then it will flow into the state repository as a commit to the state repository. So I don't know that all of the decisions have been made as to whether there will be any approval steps in there. It'll be largely automated, if not entirely automated. And then at what interval? It's whenever the state makes changes. So when they add a new facility, they're going to want to regenerate it, or when they add an agency, or they add a medication or take away a procedure. So you're probably going to see similar frequencies of updates to what you're seeing today from the states. Some states, like I'm in Oregon, Oregon updates it twice a year on a schedule. Others, I think like Nebraska, they're updating more frequently. Other questions, you know, on what I've covered so far, or what I'd like to do now is kind of pause again and say, okay, you've been using StateDataSet Builder as state data managers. We could go ahead and take a look at the StateDataSet Builder and, you know, kind of walk through it or use some areas of it. I want to see if there are any particular questions that you've come across about how to use the NEMSIS State Dataset Builder. So we're kind of talking NEMSIS 3.4 State Dataset at this point. Any questions that any of you have run into or things you'd like to take a look at in the State Dataset Builder? While you're kind of thinking of questions, I will just bring up the State Dataset Builder. It is under the View Reports menu of the NEMSIS website, and down at the bottom of that menu. I'll go ahead and click into it.
Hi, Josh. This is Clay again. I'm going to kind of put Monet a little bit on the spot. I know she works pretty closely with states in regards to their development and kind of training them a little bit on the state data set. Monet, do you hear common questions that Josh could address?
He has addressed one of the questions as it relates to the difference between the state schematron and the StateDataSet Builder. I have observed that oftentimes when a new facility is added or the code has changed, managers or their software vendors will make the change in the state schematron, but there's a little resistance to make the change in the state data set. We have tried to educate managers and vendors that they should simply add a pointer to the state data set in the schematron so that they can reduce the duplication of adding the codes or adding the facilities or adding whatever changes. But there's still some confusion on that. And the other issue right now is the validation of facility addresses. So I am trying to get state managers who have substantial list of facilities, like something like 2,000 facilities, to use the GNIS codes to populate that city location. And therefore we can avoid the manual validating the city addresses. Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about the benefit of the GNIS codes?
Yeah, those are a couple of good topics to look at. Let's take a look here in the State Dataset Builder at the facilities. This is probably the most, well, next to custom data elements, this is about the most complex list that you'll manage because facilities have lots of information about them. In particular, the city, as you know, in the NEMSIS standard, the city is a GNIS code. And what we'll see oftentimes is when a state provides their facility list in Excel format, they are providing the cities as text, just plain text strings. Now, this is a conundrum for vendors of local products because now they have to go figure out what GNIS code they need to use for that facility when they send data to the state for their agency. And some vendors may pick one GNIS code and some may pick another GNIS code because the state didn't specify. The state just provided text, and yet the data going to the state from the agency cannot be text. It has to be a GNIS code. So the State Dataset Builder helps with that. The State Dataset itself, of course, is consistent with the rest of the NEMSIS standards, so it uses GNIS codes. And so, for example, I'm in Newberg, Oregon, and if I start putting in a facility here, you'll see with the support of a Google Places lookup that we're going to get some suggestions, and I can pick one of those. So if I pick the hospital here in Newberg, it's figuring out the GNIS code for me under the hood. So it's giving me the label there of City of Newberg, but it has found a GNIS code. If I go ahead and, well, I need to select a state that I'm operating in here. If I go ahead and save my state dataset file and take a look at it, then I see here the GNIS code for Newberg as opposed to the text that says Newberg. So those GNIS codes are really important. And if you as a state don't tell the vendors what code to use, then they're going to have to make it up on their own. They may choose the civil code for City of Newberg, or they may choose the populated place code for Newberg, or they may come up with something really wacky that happens to have Newberg somewhere in the name of it. So if you specify it, then they know exactly what to use. And of course, it's the same here, you know, for the county and the state. Those are all codes under the hood, the StateDataSet Builder is picking the right codes for those. Those are less tricky because it's easy for vendors to usually figure out the code for a state or for a county, but GNIS codes are particularly messy if you don't tell them what to use. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was, let's say you've got data coming from somewhere about all your facilities. So you're able to export it from your state system in a spreadsheet format, or maybe there's a hospital licensing office that can give it to you and it's in a spreadsheet format. You can copy and paste data into the StateDataSet Builder. So you could potentially have a process in NEMSIS 3.4 where you maintain some master list in Excel, and then whenever you need to update your state data set, you simply clear out all of the facilities on the list here in the StateDataSet Builder. That's a one-button click, and then just copy and paste all of the facilities from your spreadsheet. That spreadsheet needs to be laid out in a certain way. It needs to have all of the data elements accounted for, even if they're left blank. And the NEMSIS TAC, the StateDataSet Builder, provides a spreadsheet template that you can use. Go ahead and bring that up. It's a straightforward template. It's just provided a column for each of the data elements that you would be filling out. And so then you can go ahead and you might have a spreadsheet where you're maintaining all of your facilities. And so on through the rest of the data. And then you could go ahead and copy this into the StateDataSet Builder just by copy in Excel and put your cursor in here and paste. Okay, so there, put it in. You could have hundreds of facilities, of course, and it would paste all of those in. So that may help as you're trying to maintain that list in 3.4. In 3.5, you're just going to make those changes directly in your state data system, and then you're just going to regenerate your state data set. Let's see. Okay, so Monet, you were also touching on validation rules with Schematron, where the state has a Schematron rule that says, if your destination code has to be a code that's on our state facility list. And there's a couple ways to implement that particular validation rule. The way that I've seen most states implement it is that in the Schematron rule itself, in the test of that rule, they'll have a big long list of codes that are acceptable to put into that data element for a destination code. And so it's just a big long string of maybe 1,000 codes, and it's checking to see if it's one of those. And so what happens is whenever you need to add or remove a facility in your state, then of course you should add or remove it in your state data set so that vendors will know about it. They'll know what facility it is. They'll know not only its code, but its name, address, city, state, zip, etc. And then you got to go edit your Schematron file as well, and take that big long list of strings and either insert one or delete one from the list in the validation rule. I did a training last fall. It was primarily targeted at software developers on how to support the use of it was on how to kind of get some I guess synergy between StateDataSet and Schematron by literally embedding your state data set inside of your Schematron file. And so then whenever so the Schematron rule becomes really simple. It becomes a rule that does a lookup against a list of facilities that have been embedded within the Schematron file from your state data set. And so then whenever you update your state data set, you simply re-embed it into the Schematron file. The Schematron rule itself doesn't change at all, just that embedded state data set gets updated in there and you redeploy. So that's something I trained vendors on or software developers on last year, and that training is recorded and available. That could ease things as well. Again, in 3.5, I think we'll see some nice cleanup in this area because they'll all be generated from your state system. Okay, so let's see. Hannah, how in practice do you add a pointer to the state data set into your schematron file and remove all the specific list of codes? I brought this up with our state system vendor and they seem to have no clue what I was talking about. So I'm gonna see if I can find that training. And maybe Chris or Julianne can help me out if I get lost here. Public training sessions. I was hoping it would be in here.
I think it's in the state training sessions.
State trainings, okay. Let's take a look there. Oh, yeah, it's right there at the top. Let's see, well, there's that one, and then I wanna make sure that was the one.
Oh, there's the schematron one. Oh, is that the one you're looking for, the efficient business rules?
Yeah, I think. Okay, yeah, I guess I better double check, but there's this one for state data set training. Yeah, that was, I don't think I addressed it in that one. I think it is this one further down on writing efficient business rules. So March 3rd of 2020. I think that's the one you're gonna want. So you could point your vendor to that. I think there's also some, well, I'll double check the schematron guide and the state data set guide. There might have been a little bit of information in those as well. So yeah, check out this one on writing efficient business rules and maybe share that with your vendor. Okay, great. Any other questions as we've been kind of looking at the state data set builder here? Okay, cool. Well, let's move on to the last, oh yeah, one more thing before the last section. Writing a good change log. When you send updates to your state data set or schematron or any other resources for your state to NEMSIS to update in your state repository, they ask you to tell them, to give them a change log. And I've provided here a good and bad example of a change log entry. The bad example, the one we'd like you all to move away from, is the very terse updated state data set. That's kind of self-obvious because the commit itself will indicate that the state data set was the file that got changed. And so it's really not adding any value to anyone to see that message. On the other hand, a good message to use has some more detail to it. So updated state data set. Within that, the agency list, we added these agencies, we updated these agencies, and we removed these agencies. In our facilities list, these are the ones we added, updated, and removed, and so on. And so the changes are all in the state data set. They're highlighted in the repository. The vendor can do a diff on it. They'll see the line by line changes, but this change log written in this sort of format gives them and agencies sort of the high level summary. You know, an agency might look through that list and say, okay, yeah, they added that facility. We don't use that facility, so that's fine. They removed this one. Yeah, we don't use that one either. Okay, we don't have anything that we need to do about this change. Versus if they see a facility on the list that they know they use, then they're gonna wanna take a look at that. So let me show you, how those change logs show up. Let's take a look at a state page. And I have picked Nebraska here because they do a good job with their change logs. So we're looking at their tools for 340, and we see when each of those things was last updated. So their state data set was last updated April 8th. And what we see in the update history, we see a pretty long message here, but it gives us some nice details that they updated their state data set file. They did a name change to a facility. They did a new facility. They closed a facility, etc. So lots of good detail here. The other way that this shows up is if the vendor has cloned the repository directly, then they're going to see the change log in whatever Git client they use. And so that same exact changelog shows up in the repository history. Now, interestingly, you can also get a diff. And so a vendor using automated tools and all of that, they can see line by line the things that change. They can see here that Bell Terrace was removed from that file, that Hillcrest Firethorn had a name change and with the word nursing home added. So you can get all that detail there. But that changelog is like that initial, here's what we changed. And that's very helpful to be fairly descriptive in there. Let's see, so Drew said, how do you know the active date of a schematron and state data set programmatically? Would it be wise to have a file structure to make that indication? Yeah, so in NEMSIS 3.5, we are adding a new attribute to state data set, which is called effective date. So in the NEMSIS 3.5 state data set, you will have both the date that the file was generated as well as the effective date for when those changes should be implemented by. In 3.4, we don't have that. So in 3.4, it's helpful for the state data manager to put that in their changelog to say, hey, vendors should implement this by July 1st, 2021. But in 3.5, there will be a nice, more automated way to do that. With Schematron, go back to that presentation I pointed out on writing efficient business rules. One of the approaches we recommend is that the rule itself test for the incident date on which an event happened, and then it can conditionally enforce the rule or not based on when the incident happened. So that's a good way to put in an effective date. And that still allows historical data to be resubmitted without it having to be kind of now subject to new rules that didn't exist at the time it was created. Okay, Adam said for state data set and schematron line by line changes are often not readable based on how the schematrons are changed. The quote unquote difference is kind of scrambled. The human readable changelog is very nice to have. Yeah, that's a great point. So this is a nice clean line by line diff here for Nebraska's state data set. So they did a really good job with their changes. But let's say, for example, that they had decided to resort their facility list alphabetically or by code or something. Well, then the diff is going to get really messy because all those lines changed, even though there wasn't really any substantial content change in it. And that kind of stuff can happen pretty easily. So again, that's a good extra reason to have that change log well written. Good, great questions and comments. Okay, let's move to the last piece here. There are some Tableau reports, dashboards on the NEMSIS website that utilize the data from your state data set. Before I move into that, let me get to Brian's question. Is there a way to generate a list of facilities for publication purposes? Yeah, let's take a look. Let's go back to Nebraska. Their state data set is in XML format, but people can view it online. So if I click on that state data set button, I'm actually going to get an online view of their state data set. I'm going to see, even though these were GNIS codes for cities, this online view is decoding all of those and giving you the actual text of that city. I can decide which columns I want to see on each of those facilities and can view the list this way. Incidentally, this view also gives me the ability to just download this whole list as a CSV file. So I can do that, and now I have, in a second here, there we go. I have Nebraska's facility list provided to me in a CSV file. Brian, did that answer your question sufficiently? Okay, great. Okay, yeah, these dashboards, these allow you to kind of do research on what other states are doing. So I'm going to just run through each of these briefly. And I'm going to go ahead and just go over to the NEMSIS website so I can show you how you would navigate to them. We're going to go to View Reports and then State Reports, Version 3 Dashboards. And scroll partway down and you're going to see the V3 state assets report, the data elements, and the procedures, meds, and protocols, all three of those reports. If I go into the state assets report, this is pulling data from all of the state data sets that states have submitted. Give that a second to load. And this allows you to do some comparison and see, we were talking earlier about, hey, some states are just providing the bare minimum, like just one piece of their state data set. Here you can see the sections that the greatest number of states have provided in their state data set versus sections that fewer states have provided, as well as, schematron files and so on. So that's the state assets report, just kind of a high level overview. Let's see. The state data elements report allows you to compare which data elements the various states collect. This again is just pulling from that data element list in the state data set. So let's take a look. For example, lots of national elements, the ones in red are national elements. And yeah, most states collect those. And then the ones in yellow are state recommended elements. So a good number of states collect those. And then you can see all the ones in blue that are optional elements. And some states collect those. And so you might be interested in a particular data element and say, well, which states collect that element? So if we go to say, well, let's skip down through demographics down to EPCR data. Which states collect Social Security number, since that's a sensitive one. Okay, so I've clicked on Social Security number, and if I come back up to the map here, these are the states that collect Social Security number. So that's kind of helpful for research as you're going through administrative rule changes or such, and you may have committees talking about which data elements you should collect. You can have some comparison to say, well, here's what other states do. Okay, and then, oops. Sorry, get back where I was. Okay, and then the medications, procedures, medications, and protocols report. This will show you which medications, procedures, and protocols other states allow and what levels they allow it at. So you could click on a particular state, or you could filter to a particular level. So for example, let's look at EMRs. EMRs would have a more limited list of procedures. And this shows how many states allow, each of these different procedures that are used by at the EMR level. And so, or medications. Go over to medications here. One that might come up would be naloxone. So you can search for naloxone. There are 20 states that allow, that have provided a medication list, and naloxone is on their medication list. Now, if I filter down to EMR, I see that there are 7 states that allow their EMRs to administer naloxone. So there's some handy research that can be done there. One other thing I forgot, should have mentioned is the National Custom Element Library. That is also driven by data that you've provided in your state data set. So the custom elements that you define in your state data set, they show up in the custom element library. And similarly, we can search for various things that states may be collecting through their custom data elements. For example, if we go to the national custom elements, we see that Florida and Oregon have both adopted a couple of those elements. Georgia has adopted a couple of them into their, and they're in their state data set. So those are some resources you can use for research. All right, well, we only have a couple minutes left. Want to see if there are any other questions that I can address before we end the call today. So Ridgely said, how do you determine if they collect an element? I think I covered that. Ridgely, did you have a further question on that?
Sorry, I must have missed that. So is it coming from the way that elements, everything's sent into you guys, or is it from a list somewhere?
It's from the state data set. Yeah,
Okay.
let's,
That's fine. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so that would be back in that state collected elements report, state data elements.
Yeah, no, the question is
Yeah.
how does it know?
Yeah, so you remember the national database only receives national elements, so they would never know what your state collects unless you tell them in your state data set which elements you collect. So this is all coming from your list in your state data set.
Okay, thanks.
So let's see, there's Massachusetts there. Okay, so there's the list of elements that Massachusetts collects according to your state data set. Great, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, any last questions? All right, well, I really appreciate everyone's time on this training today. Thanks for joining, and I hope you got something useful out of it. And yeah, back to you, Julianne. I don't know if you have any closing stuff.
I think we're good. Thank you, everyone. We will post this to our website and also to our YouTube channel by end of day tomorrow. So you're able to share it or refer back to it. Thank you so much, Josh. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everyone.